Were easy American lunch recipes from the 1950s really this simple and this comforting? In the 50s, lunches like these shaped school days, family kitchens, and diner counters with flavors everyone could afford and trust. How different would daily life feel without meals like these holding it together? Open-faced cheese melt sandwiches were one of the simplest yet most comforting lunches of the 1950s, made by placing a slice of white bread under a broiler with a slab of American cheese on top until it bubbled and browned. Housewives praised it for speed and thrift because it transformed the most basic pantry ingredients into something warm and satisfying without effort. Children loved how gooey the cheese became, pulling in stretchy strands with every bite, while parents enjoyed knowing it cost only a few cents. Sometimes a slice of tomato or a sprinkle of paprika was added, but most families were content with the plain version. This lunch was often paired with tomato soup or a small salad, rounding out a meal that felt complete even on the tightest budget. The open-faced cheese melt represented the era's new fascination with convenience cooking, where a few minutes under the broiler created a dish that felt far richer than it really was. In countless kitchens, the smell of melting cheese meant comfort was on the way. Tomato soup with saltines became one of the quintessential lunches of the 1950s, thanks to Campbell's and the growing popularity of canned convenience foods. Housewives valued it because they could open a can, add water or milk, heat it on the stove, and have lunch ready in minutes. Saltines, crisp and salty, were stacked on top or crumbled into the soup, making it heartier. For children, this was the warm bowl they remembered coming home to on chilly afternoons, filling the house with a rich tomato aroma. Parents liked it because it was inexpensive, dependable, and easy to keep stocked in the pantry. Advertisements during the era promoted it as nourishing and family-friendly, tying it to the image of wholesome domestic life. The pairing of soup and crackers became a symbol of mid-century American eating, where practicality and comfort came first. Families who grew up in the 1950s often look back fondly on tomato soup and saltines as the meal that never failed to bring warmth on a cold day. Ham and pineapple sandwiches captured the spirit of the tiki craze that swept across America during the 1950s, blending sweet and savory flavors in a way that felt exotic yet accessible. Thin slices of ham were layered with rings of pineapple, often canned, and placed between bread or rolls with mayonnaise. The result was tangy, salty, and slightly sweet, a taste that stood out from the usual sandwiches of the time. Families were fascinated by the idea of tropical flavor, and pineapple became a star ingredient in many mid-century kitchens. The ham and pineapple sandwich reflected this trend, offering a quick way to enjoy something that felt adventurous without costing much. It was common at luncheons, church gatherings, and even in school lunchboxes. Canned pineapple made it affordable and easy to prepare year-round. The combination's popularity endured well past the decade, becoming a hallmark of mid-century curiosity about global flavors. For many, biting into this sandwich was a reminder that even simple lunches could feel like a vacation. Peanut butter and raisin sandwiches were a practical and slightly playful lunchbox option in 1950s households, made by spreading peanut butter across bread and sprinkling raisins on top. Children loved the chewy sweetness of raisins mixed with creamy peanut butter, a pairing that felt like a treat even though it was inexpensive. Parents liked it because it required no cooking and delivered protein along with natural sugars. When raisins were added to peanut butter spread on celery sticks, the snack was nicknamed ants on a log, but on bread, it became a filling lunch. The sandwich was simple enough for children to make themselves, adding to its popularity as a staple of after-school snacks. Raisins stored well in the pantry and were cheaper than jams or jellies, making them a thrifty choice. The peanut butter and raisin sandwich carried the same spirit of ingenuity seen across 1950s kitchens, where stretching simple staples created memorable meals. For those who grew up with it, the taste still sparks nostalgia for school lunch tables and childhood afternoons. Bologna and relish sandwiches were one of the most common budget lunches of the 1950s, relying on inexpensive luncheon meat paired with sweet pickle relish to add flavor. Bologna was cheap, widely available, and easy to slice for quick sandwiches. Housewives used it often because it filled stomachs without straining the grocery bill, while relish brightened the otherwise plain flavor. For children, this sandwich became a lunchbox standby, wrapped in wax paper and carried to school day after day. Adults also enjoyed it as a portable lunch at factories and offices, appreciating its simplicity. Processed meats were heavily marketed during the decade as modern and convenient, and Bologna fit perfectly into that image. Relish, sold in jars that lasted weeks, was the thrifty housewife's secret weapon for adding zest. Together, they made a sandwich that was practical, satisfying, and reflective of the era's reliance on affordable processed foods. The Bologna and relish sandwich remains a symbol of mid-century frugality and convenience, remembered fondly by many who grew up eating it regularly. Chicken and rice soup was another lunchtime favorite of the 1950s, often coming from a can but still delivering comfort and warmth. Housewives kept shelves lined with soups because they were quick, dependable, and inexpensive, and chicken and rice was one of the most beloved varieties. It offered a lighter alternative to heavier meat dishes while still feeling nourishing. Crackers or bread often accompanied it, stretching the meal further. Children appreciated the mild flavor, while adults liked that it was easy to digest and filling enough for a midday meal. The convenience of canned soups matched the growing culture of quick cooking, where less time was spent in the kitchen but meals still needed to be hearty. Advertisements of the era leaned heavily on the promise of wholesome family meals in minutes, and chicken and rice soup was the perfect example. For countless families, a bowl of this soup represented comfort, frugality, and the reassuring taste of something simple. It remains a reminder of how mid-century America embraced both tradition and convenience. Liverwurst sandwiches were a staple in many mid-century American kitchens, reflecting the influence of German-American food traditions. Liverwurst, a spreadable sausage made from liver and spices, was sliced or smeared onto bread, often with onions or mustard to enhance the flavor. It was inexpensive, protein-rich, and easy to prepare, making it a practical lunch for families on a budget. Children sometimes resisted its strong taste, but adults appreciated it as a hearty and flavorful option. In many immigrant households, it was a taste of home that connected them to European roots. Grocery stores in the 1950s commonly carried liverwurst alongside other processed meats, and advertisements promoted it as modern convenience food. It was often wrapped in paper at the deli counter and served as an everyday staple rather than a luxury. The liverwurst sandwich embodied the era's focus on practicality, thrift, and simple nourishment. For those who grew up with it, the strong taste still brings back memories of packed lunches and family kitchens where nothing went to waste. Egg foo, young sandwiches, brought a touch of Chinese-American flavor to diner counters during the 1950s, when global influences were just beginning to shape everyday meals. Egg foo young, a Chinese-inspired omelet with vegetables and sometimes meat, was tucked into bread and sold as a sandwich. It reflected America's growing curiosity about international cuisines while still being adapted for local tastes. Diners promoted it as exotic but accessible, serving it alongside fries and coffee for quick lunches. Housewives also tried making simplified versions at home, using leftover vegetables and eggs to recreate the dish in a thrifty way. For children, it was a novelty to taste something so different, while adults appreciated its hearty filling. The egg foo young sandwich showed how immigrant recipes blended into mainstream dining, reshaping what Americans considered lunch food. Its popularity in diners and community cookbooks helped introduce many to flavors they had never experienced before. For mid-century eaters, it was a small step into a wider culinary world without leaving home. Cold spaghetti sandwiches were a frugal trick that turned dinner leftovers into portable lunches. Housewives discovered that leftover spaghetti, often dressed in tomato sauce, could be pressed between slices of bread and sent to school or work the next day. It was unusual but practical, using what was already available rather than wasting food. Children sometimes looked at it with skepticism, but once they tasted the chewy noodles inside soft bread, it became another familiar memory of mid-century kitchens. Adults valued it because it required no cooking and stretched the grocery budget. In immigrant households, particularly Italian-American ones, This sandwich was an easy way to enjoy pasta outside of dinner time. It reflected the wider American habit of repurposing food creatively during the 1950s, when frugality and efficiency still shaped daily cooking. For many families, the cold spaghetti sandwich was a symbol of practicality, reminding them that no meal was ever wasted. It may seem odd today, but it carried families through. Cheese and relish sandwiches were quick, zesty fillers that became popular in the 1950s, lunchboxes and office lunches. A slice of American cheese paired with sweet pickle relish on bread created a sandwich that was simple yet flavorful. Housewives liked it because it required no cooking and made use of processed foods that were inexpensive and widely available. Children appreciated the sweet tang of relish, which made even plain cheese taste more exciting. This sandwich often appeared at picnics, church potlucks, and factory lunch breaks, proving how versatile it was. Cheese was sold in packages that lasted for weeks, while relish jars stretched across dozens of sandwiches, making the combination budget-friendly. It reflected the mid-century shift toward convenience foods that still felt homemade. Though modest, the cheese and relish sandwich carried enough flavor to keep it from feeling boring. For many, it was the taste of childhood afternoons, lunch counters, and the era's reliance on thrifty but dependable recipes. Peanut butter and carrot sandwiches were a thrifty invention that brought both crunch and sweetness to the familiar spread. Housewives shredded carrots finely and mixed them with peanut butter, creating a filling that was cheap, colorful, and surprisingly nutritious. It stretched the peanut butter further, which was important in years when groceries had to last. Children sometimes found the taste unusual, but many grew to enjoy the texture and sweetness that carrots added. Packed into lunchboxes, this sandwich carried both protein and vitamins without the expense of meat or jam. It was also quick to make, requiring nothing more than a knife, grater, and a loaf of bread. In many households, carrots were always on hand, whether fresh from a garden or bought cheaply at the market. The peanut butter and carrot sandwich reflected the creativity of 1950s kitchens, where simple substitutions made food more interesting and economical. For many, it remains a memory of school lunches and the ingenuity of mothers who stretched every ingredient into something filling. Ham and egg salad plates were common on lunch counters and in home kitchens across mid-century America, offering a simple combination of sliced ham and a scoop of creamy egg salad. Served cold, often with crackers or bread on the side, they provided a light yet satisfying meal. Housewives liked it because both parts could be prepared in advance, making it easy to assemble when guests or children needed quick lunches. Egg salad was cheap and hearty, made with boiled eggs, mayonnaise, and sometimes pickles, while ham added a touch of savory protein. Together they created balance, both frugal and appealing. Cafeterias and diners loved serving ham and egg salad plates because they required minimal cooking and used readily available ingredients. For children, it was mild and easy to eat, while adults appreciated its convenience during busy workdays. This dish captured the 1950s approach to lunch perfectly. Affordable, filling, and made from familiar staples that never failed to please. Cottage cheese and tomato slices were a mid-century staple that fit perfectly into the light lunch trend of the 1950s. Served on a plate, cottage cheese was spooned beside thick slices of ripe tomatoes, often sprinkled with salt or pepper. This simple pairing was praised as healthy, refreshing, and inexpensive, especially at a time when calorie-conscious meals were gaining popularity. Housewives prepared it regularly for quick family lunches, and diners featured it as part of their lighter menu options. The dish carried a wholesome image, with cottage cheese advertised as a protein-rich food perfect for modern families. Tomatoes were plentiful thanks to home gardens and post-war distribution, making the combination easy to prepare year-round. It offered nourishment without heaviness, which was especially appealing during warmer months. Many remember eating cottage cheese and tomatoes on hot afternoons when lighter meals were welcome. This dish reflected both practicality and a growing focus on health, qualities that made it a favorite across American households and lunch counters alike. Sardine sandwiches were one of the most inexpensive fish-based lunches that families turned to during the 1950s. Canned sardines were mashed with mayonnaise, onions, or mustard to create a flavorful filling spread across bread. This made a protein-rich meal at a fraction of the cost of fresh fish or meat. Housewives liked sardine sandwiches because they were affordable, shelf-stable, and easy to prepare in minutes. For children, the strong taste could be divisive, but many grew to enjoy them because they were hearty and filling. Adults often carried them to work, wrapped tightly to keep the oily filling from soaking through bread. Sardines were marketed as healthful, packed with vitamins, which made them appealing even beyond thrift. The sandwich was common in immigrant neighborhoods as well, where sardines were already part of traditional diets. It was one of those practical recipes that proved canned goods could be both nutritious and satisfying. The sardine sandwich remains a reminder of mid-century frugality and reliance on inexpensive pantry staples. Hamburger steak plates became a familiar sight in diners and homes alike, offering a bunless burger patty served with onions, pickles, and a slice of bread on the side. This dish delivered the flavor of a hamburger without the expense of making a full sandwich. It was hearty, satisfying, and versatile, often topped with gravy or paired with mashed potatoes. Housewives cooked hamburger steaks at home as a thrifty way to serve beef in portions that stretched further. Diners marketed them as quick lunches, perfect for workers on short breaks who wanted something filling without paying for extras. For children, it was an exciting meal that felt indulgent even though it was simple. Adults appreciated the straightforward flavor and the value it offered during a decade when convenience and thrift mattered. The hamburger steak plate reflected the 1950s balance between home-style comfort and quick-service dining. It showed how familiar flavors could be adapted to budgets and made into meals that everyone recognized and enjoyed. Pork and bean casserole cups were creative uses of leftovers, turning inexpensive baked beans into single-serving lunches. Housewives would spoon beans into small ramekins, top them with breadcrumbs or bits of pork, and bake them until bubbling. The result was a dish that felt hearty and special, even though it came from simple ingredients. This thrifty practice was common in the 1950s, when stretching food across multiple meals was essential. Children liked the savory flavor and crispy topping, while adults appreciated the convenience of preparing several cups at once. Cafeterias and church luncheons often featured similar dishes because they were affordable to serve in large batches. Beans provided protein and bulk, while small amounts of pork added flavor without raising the cost. The casserole cups were practical, filling, and perfectly aligned with the mid-century approach to cooking. Make the most of what you have and present it in a new way. For many, they remain a nostalgic example of creative thrift. Cheese and onion sandwiches delivered bold flavor at little cost, layering slices of processed cheese with raw or lightly cooked onions. The sharpness of the onions balanced with the creamy, mild cheese, making a sandwich that was simple yet satisfying. Housewives used it as a quick lunch option because both ingredients were inexpensive and readily available. Children sometimes resisted the strong onion flavor, but adults appreciated its heartiness and zest. It was common in lunchboxes, factories, and even at casual gatherings where thrifty sandwiches were served to guests. Processed cheese slices became a defining product of the 1950s, marketed as modern, long-lasting, and perfect for sandwiches. Paired with onions, they created a combination that was memorable and filling without requiring meat. The cheese and onion sandwich reflected how practical ingredients could be combined for flavor and sustenance in equal measure. For many, it was a bold but familiar taste of the decade. Cold roast beef sandwiches were a favorite way to stretch Sunday dinners into weekday lunches. Leftover beef was sliced thin and layered between bread, often with mustard or horseradish. The result was a hearty, protein-rich meal that cost little once the main roast had already been served. Housewives relied on this practice to make sure expensive cuts of meat lasted as long as possible. Children took cold roast beef sandwiches to school wrapped in wax paper, while adults carried them to work in lunch pails. The sandwich was flavorful, filling, and always welcome, providing comfort during busy days. In the 1950s, roasts were still a common centerpiece of family meals, so leftovers were inevitable. Turning them into sandwiches was simply smart cooking. It represented both thrift and resourcefulness, values deeply tied to mid-century kitchens. For many families, cold roast beef sandwiches became a weekly tradition, tying Sunday dinners to the rest of the week. Shrimp cocktail cups were one of the more glamorous lunch options of the 1950s, often served in diners, restaurants, and even at home parties. Small shrimp were cooked, chilled, and served in cups or lettuce leaves with tangy cocktail sauce. For many families, this dish felt sophisticated while still being relatively affordable thanks to frozen seafood becoming more widely available. Housewives enjoyed presenting it at luncheons because it looked elegant without being difficult to prepare. Children were less enthusiastic, but adults welcomed it as a refreshing change from heavier meals. Shrimp cocktail cups reflected the mid-century fascination with foods that felt both modern and special. They became popular in community gatherings, where presentation mattered almost as much as taste. Though simple to prepare, the dish carried an air of celebration that made it stand out among everyday lunches. For many, shrimp cocktail cups remain a nostalgic reminder of a time when even lunches could feel fancy. Peanut butter and celery sandwiches were crunchy, thrifty creations that added texture and freshness to the classic spread. Celery sticks were chopped or sliced thinly, then mixed into peanut butter or layered directly inside bread. The result was a sandwich that combined creaminess and crunch at almost no cost. Housewives appreciated it for being both nutritious and affordable, stretching a jar of peanut butter across more meals. Children enjoyed the novelty of biting into crunchy celery paired with the familiar peanut butter flavor. It was easy to prepare, portable, and suitable for lunchboxes or quick snacks at home. Celery was inexpensive and often grown in backyard gardens, making it a dependable addition to meals. The peanut butter and celery sandwich captured the 1950s balance of thrift and ingenuity, turning ordinary staples into something memorable. For many, it was the taste of frugality wrapped up in bread. Hot turkey sandwich with gravy was one of the heartiest lunch plates you could find in the 1950s, served open-faced with slices of bread, turkey, and brown gravy poured generously over the top. It was a smart way to use up leftovers from Sunday dinners and stretch an expensive roast across more meals. Diners popularized it too, making it a reliable comfort food that appealed to both workers and families. Housewives loved it because it required little extra effort once turkey was already cooked, and children enjoyed the warm, savory flavor. The bread soaked up every bit of gravy, turning plain slices into something filling. Even when portions of meat were small, the gravy made the sandwich feel complete. It was practical, comforting, and deeply tied to memories of mid-century kitchens where thrift was always in mind. Many who grew up during the decade still recall the taste of hot turkey sandwiches as the definition of resourceful comfort. Pickled beet and egg salad sandwiches were one of the most visually striking foods to appear in 1950s kitchens, with their bright pink colors standing out on lunch tables. The filling was made by mixing chopped pickled beets with mashed boiled eggs and mayonnaise, creating a tangy and creamy spread. Housewives liked it because it was inexpensive yet unique, offering both nutrition and novelty. Children often reacted to its unusual color with curiosity, and some developed a fondness for its sweet and sour taste. Served on white bread, the vivid pink filling looked almost festive, making it popular for luncheons and gatherings. Eggs were cheap and filling, while pickled beets added sharpness without much cost. The sandwich reflected mid-century America's willingness to experiment with color and flavor in ways that were both practical and playful. Though rarely seen today, it remains a symbol of how even humble ingredients could be transformed into something memorable and distinctly tied to its era. Hot dog and cheese sandwiches were a thrifty way to turn an inexpensive ingredient into a hearty lunch. Chopped hot dogs were mixed with cheese spread and pressed onto bread, then baked or broiled until warm. Housewives appreciated it because it stretched a package of hot dogs across several sandwiches, making it affordable for large families. Children loved it because it combined two favorites in one simple dish, creating a salty, gooey treat that felt indulgent despite its low cost. Diners served versions of it as quick plates, offering comfort food at a low price. The recipe was flexible, allowing leftover hot dogs to be used creatively. It represented the era's focus on convenience, using processed meats and spreads to create filling meals with little effort. Hot dog and cheese sandwiches were not glamorous, but they were dependable and easy to prepare. For many, they became one of the most familiar tastes of growing up in a mid-century household. Fried egg sandwiches were one of the simplest and most dependable meals you could make in the 1950s, prepared quickly on the stovetop. Eggs were cracked into a pan, fried until the whites set, and tucked inside bread with a smear of mayonnaise or butter. Housewives relied on them because they cost only pennies and provided much-needed protein. Children often ate them before school, while adults packed them in lunch pails for work. The sandwich could be eaten plain or seasoned lightly with salt and pepper, making it versatile and satisfying. Diners also served fried egg sandwiches because they were quick to prepare and filling for customers on short breaks. The taste was familiar and comforting, carrying the simplicity of home cooking into daily life. They were not extravagant, but they were reliable and beloved. The fried egg sandwich remains one of the clearest examples of how mid-century America valued practicality in its meals. Vegetable gelatin salad. Sandwich filling may sound unusual today, but it was a celebrated oddity of mid-century cooking. Diced vegetables were suspended in savory gelatin, then chopped and spread onto bread as a filling. Housewives liked it because it was visually striking, affordable, and offered something different for luncheons. The texture was wobbly, creamy, and crisp all at once, which made it stand out at gatherings. Children often looked at it with hesitation, but adults sometimes enjoyed its novelty. It reflected the era's fascination with gelatin as a modern and versatile ingredient. Cookbooks and community recipe cards frequently promoted it as an exciting way to present vegetables. Though it may seem bizarre now, it carried the same thrift and practicality as other recipes of the time. Vegetable gelatin sandwiches remain one of the most memorable curiosities of 1950s kitchens, symbolizing both creativity and the willingness to experiment with anything that stretched food further. Peanut butter and pineapple sandwiches captured the sweet tropical fascination of mid-century America, pairing creamy peanut butter with tangy pineapple. Canned pineapple made this sandwich affordable and accessible year-round, while peanut butter added protein and richness. Housewives prepared it for children's lunches because it felt like a treat without requiring expensive ingredients. Children enjoyed the sweet and salty contrast, which stood out from plainer options. The sandwich also reflected the tiki craze, when American households eagerly adopted flavors they considered exotic. It was quick to assemble, easy to pack, and cost only a few cents per serving. For many, it carried the taste of experimentation and the spirit of post-war optimism when new flavors entered everyday kitchens. Though unusual by today's standards, peanut butter and pineapple sandwiches offered both thrift and a sense of adventure. They remain a nostalgic example of how families embraced novelty without straying far from pantry staples. Chili with saltine crackers was a classic lunch plate in diners and cafeterias throughout the 1950s, combining hearty stew with a simple, affordable side. A bowl of chili, often made from ground beef, beans, and spices, was served with stacks of crisp crackers. This pairing made the meal both filling and economical, perfect for workers and students alike. Housewives also prepared chili at home in large pots, knowing it could feed an entire family while costing little. Crackers stretched each serving further, adding crunch and bulk. Children enjoyed dipping crackers into the rich sauce, while adults valued the warmth and practicality. Chili with saltines was especially popular in colder months when hearty meals were needed most. It reflected the era's reliance on inexpensive, comforting foods that could be shared by many. Though simple, it carried the sense of community and thrift that defined much of mid-century cooking. For many, chili and crackers remain tied to memories of diners and school cafeterias. Spam and egg salad sandwiches were a thrifty combination that reflected the 1950s reliance on both processed meats and easy spreads. Chopped spam was mixed with boiled eggs, mayonnaise, and seasonings, then spread between bread for a protein-packed meal. Housewives liked it because it stretched expensive meats further and made use of ingredients that stored well. Children enjoyed the creamy texture and savory taste, which felt richer than plain egg salad. Diners and lunch counters also served versions of it, appealing to customers who wanted something hearty but inexpensive. Spam had already become a household staple during wartime, and egg salad was a natural partner. Together, they created a sandwich that was both practical and filling, aligning perfectly with the values of mid-century kitchens. For many, it remains a nostalgic reminder of how families made do with affordable products while still creating meals that tasted satisfying. The Spam and egg salad sandwich is one of those forgotten yet clever recipes from the era. Apple and cheese. Open-faced sandwiches were a warm and thrifty mid-century favorite, made by layering slices of apple and cheddar cheese onto bread and baking until melted. The sweetness of the fruit balanced the sharp cheese, creating a sandwich that was both savory and refreshing. Housewives appreciated it because apples were inexpensive and widely available, while cheese provided protein. Children enjoyed the novelty of baked apples combined with gooey cheese, which felt indulgent without being costly. It was also a way to use leftover bread that might otherwise go stale, giving it new life. Diners sometimes featured apple and cheese melts as part of light lunch menus, showcasing how simple ingredients could feel special when baked. The open-face style was typical of the era, making presentation easy. This sandwich reflected the 1950s emphasis on practicality blended with a touch of creativity. For many, it remains a nostalgic reminder of lunches that were both economical and comforting. Tomato and lettuce sandwiches were one of the simplest and most refreshing options during hot 1950s summers. Thick slices of ripe tomato and crisp lettuce were layered on bread with mayonnaise, creating a light but satisfying meal. Housewives often turned to this sandwich when gardens overflowed with fresh produce, making it affordable and easy. Children liked its cool crunch, while adults appreciated its simplicity. It was common at picnics, lunch counters, and in school lunchboxes, proving how versatile it was. The sandwich captured the spirit of the season, offering nourishment without heaviness. Tomatoes and lettuce were staples of backyard gardens, so families often enjoyed them at little cost. Mayonnaise added creaminess, binding everything together in a way that felt comforting. The tomato and lettuce sandwich reflected the era's reliance on fresh, seasonal ingredients as part of daily life. For many, it is remembered as the taste of summer afternoons spent outdoors, when simple meals brought comfort and refreshment. Liverwurst and onion sandwiches were a really straightforward dish. There wasn't a lot going on here, and it was really just a 3-ingredient dish. Finally, we're going to back sandwiches we can actually recognize and digest. Who has their stuff cold? Not me. Liverwurst and onion sandwiches luckily aren't exactly things you serve cold either. This is a dish best served piping hot. See, liverwurst in itself is just a sausage that's been made with liver and some other parts of meat. Then you take in some raw onions and sauté them, serve them between slices of toasted bread with cheese, and there you go. Liverwurst is something we got from European and German communities, and it was really popular in areas like Detroit and Pennsylvania, where there were strong populations of European communities. Liverwurst was typically always blended with warm spices like allspice and nutmeg too, so you could either make it into this flavorful pâté or slice it and layer it with other kinds of things as well as cheese, of course. It's something that just faded out of relevance, though. It wasn't bad or impractical, but I guess it was a little too simple. Blue crab was a really common and affordable food for a lot of coastal communities. It has become a sought-after item in places like Maryland and Louisiana and the Carolinas. But how did it get here? Blue crab was considered an everyday coastal food that was abundant among fish markets and fishermen. You would go take a walk along the East Coast and the Gulf Coast, and all you would ever see is a seemingly endless supply of blue crab that would never really go down either. For a lot of working-class families, this was a staple protein that was really helping them get through the day, while also making sure they were meeting their nutrition needs. Now, the labor process here was really hard. It took a lot to make blue crab, and cracking blue crabs to get the different kinds of meat was really time-consuming. It meant that they were less desirable for other consumers who basically would prefer lobster or oysters, especially the rich kind. They were really cheap and they weren't ever given away in fishing towns. people made use of everything they could, mostly because they were so available, you know? While you would think that would mean that people would essentially always sell the excess fish, they would actually just stock up on it for winters and consume it. Blue crab started to become expensive thanks to the rise of commercial fishing and a lot of environmental work that had risen in the Chesapeake Bay. Blue crab populations were starting to decline really sharply, and it became a thing of national concern. That and the high labor cost meant that blue crab was starting to get really pricey. Cold fried chicken wasn't exactly what the name makes it sound like. You can't really cold fry something, obviously, but what you can do is serve fried chicken that's been chilled, or fried chicken that's at least at room temperature. See, this was something that got popular at picnics, and it was a way for people to get rid of leftovers when they didn't have microwaves. As you might know, fried chicken tends to lose a lot of its charm when you just warm it up on a pan and stove. Now, I'm no one to judge, but that's just not how you do it. Naturally, though, if you don't have a microwave, that's where your head would go, and a lot of people just didn't back then. So, what's the next step? Do we bite the bullet and eat that delicious fried chicken cold or at room temperature? Or do we warm it up and lose a lot of the bang for buck value that comes with a 3-piece combo for like $2 or $3? Most people stuck with the first option. Cold fried chicken would also be good as a work lunch because it was an easy way to get rid of your leftovers if you didn't feel like eating it at home, plus it was super quick. Just grab the fried chicken, box it, and go. You had your work lunch for that day sorted. It caught on a lot more than you'd think, really. Stuffed potato pancakes are a delight to have on their own, but they go great with any kind of syrup or dip too. And if you had grandkids coming over and did not know what to make, this was a surefire bet. Potatoes have always been a massive staple of American cuisine and culture, partly because they form the basis of many simple, affordable dishes. An example of this is how in the Depression there were several potato-based dishes that people regularly adopted, and they stuck in the cultural landscape of American cooking much longer after the dust from the recession had settled. In states like Ohio, Oregon, and Idaho, it is still common to see potato-centered dishes taking the #1 spot. So imagine the rounds they made back when they were truly in style. Taking a break away from the McDonald's and the Wendy's, stuffed potato pancakes usually have bits of meat stuffed in them like sausages, pork, or ground beef. And it is not only packed with flavor, but a great dish to eat if you are looking to bulk up too. Grandma does know best, after all. Croque madames involve layers of melted cheese smothered between freshly baked, crisp white bread. And to top it all off, there's an intense, smoky flavor from the ham. The best part about it is that it takes minutes to make, and it was one of the more fancy dishes that people would create when they were feeling like having a bit of an extravagant dinner. Everyone deserves to treat themselves sometimes, but for home chefs, especially grandparents, the biggest treat is often just seeing everyone eat up every last bite of what they've made. That was never a problem if croque madames were the dish being served, because nobody could resist this classic American sandwich that did more than its fair share of justice to ham. Poached or lightly fried eggs as a topping also made it work a lot better. And by the way, they are called croque madames because the poached eggs seem to resemble women's luxury hats in the 90s. Boiled carrot sandwiches was created from the weird culinary gap left by increasing prices and thinner savings accounts. Like we said, people wanted vegetables that ticked the cheaper and tastier most boxes for them. However, even that was getting tough. Some of the worst stretches of the Great Depression left people with frustrations and creativity alike. Whipping up dishes like this was common, and the boiled carrot sandwich definitely stayed during the time because of its simplicity. Americans love a good sandwich, and they adore an easy-to-cook filling. Boiled carrot sandwiches definitely met most of the criteria, as roasting cheese to create an open-faced sandwich was a popular choice. Suffering the same fate as other dishes on this list, the boiled carrot sandwich eventually died out as economic growth increased in America. So you know how America and pulled pork go together like jam on toast, right? After all, it's something you can feed a whole crowd and have them feeling full and satisfied. It's a showstopper, but you can make a lot of easy things with it. Most dishes you can make and serve will have people asking you what your recipe is, but that's just how easy pulled pork is to work with. So when I say this next sentence, hear it with an open mind. How do you feel about cherry cola pulled pork? Yeah, slow-cooked, barbecue-y, savory pulled pork left to simmer in a pool of cherry cola, barbecue sauce, and other seasonings. The first time I heard of this dish, I struggled just to imagine all of those flavors in one bite. Like, barbecue sauce is a dip, pulled pork is a main dish, and cherry cola is a drink. You're used to having all that separately, right? Despite that, since it was all made from things that were so readily available in most homes, and since it was right up the alley of home chefs in their slow-cooking era, it took off in a major way. Especially in the South, where everything involved in this dish is something people were already having on a daily basis. Speaking of those times, another really good source of protein was catfish, and one of the best ways to have it was fried catfish with hush puppies. This is again something that'll take us right to the heart of Southern cooking if we eat it. Along those rural places near rivers, lakes, ponds, and other bodies of water where you could find fresh catfish in abundance. Hush puppies were something made with fried cornmeal batter and were a popular dish to give to soldiers during the Civil War, so all in all, this dish was really light money-wise. Some basic Cajun spices or a Southern spice blend would make it even better into a real full-fledged meal that you could eat in comfort with the family. While it's been a big part of Southern cooking ever since the 19th century, it arguably had its biggest glory days in the 20th one as part of Southern soul food. There was a time in the 30s to 40s where soul food started to get into more and more menus across several places in the South, which wasn't always the case. Thank God it did, though, because steamed catfish definitely doesn't hit the spot quite like fried ones do with some golden brown hush puppies. Tuna salad made a fresh comeback, which helped extend its shelf life in the American homemade breakfast or lunch scene. The tuna salad everyone was already pretty accustomed to was reconstructed, this time with seasonal and tropical fruits like apples or cranberries and served in fresh pita sliced in half. Not only was this really healthy, but it was also intensely high in protein and carbs, so it helped you build that all-important muscle while keeping you full until a suitable time in the evening. Cannot give in to those post-meal munchie cravings, right? Tuna salad was great served as is, but some people would go a step further by baking it for a while too. This recipe really made a name for itself during the mid-1930s to 40s when people were facing a dire shortage of eggs. Still, if you did not have even some potatoes on hand but still wanted a pancake to cheer your kids up, you would go for eggless pancakes. Some shortening, sugar, milk, and salt were all you needed to make this version of the beloved American dish, plus just some water to bind if you could not find any milk to spare. Lucky were the homes that had lard, as that really made for some fluffy and thick cakes, but complaining was not really something people did during those times. A simple recipe like this let them revisit the taste of pancakes from back when they had fully stocked fridges, after all. Next up, a dish that sounds almost too simple to be true: tomato sauce with mashed potatoes. I know, it doesn't exactly scream gourmet, but remember, we're talking about a time when people were just trying to survive. This combo was a way to stretch those precious few ingredients. During the Great Depression, potatoes were a cheap and filling staple, and tomato sauce was an easy way to add flavor. This dish was essentially a plate of creamy mashed potatoes topped with a savory tomato sauce. It might sound a bit unusual, but this combination was a hit because it was cheap, easy to make, and comforting. Plus, potatoes were versatile. You could mash them, fry them, or bake them depending on what you had. So, if you're ever in the mood for a simple yet tasty meal, try tomato sauce with mashed potatoes. Let's see if this humble dish can impress our modern taste buds. Now, this might be an odd pairing to a lot of you, but peanut butter and bacon sandwiches really did hit. Hey, some of you who are 90s kids might even remember. This was basically one of the best lunches you could get, and to be honest, I still think a lot of people do make this even if it's not as popular as it used to be. It was just a flawless idea in concept and execution. Take 2 slices of bread, a dash of peanut butter, and some perfectly well-fried strips of bacon. It's genius. Throw in some iceberg mayo and whatever else it is you like and whatever keeps you going throughout that miserable shift, and you have yourself a full-sized snack and meal. This was basically the reason why this dish got so popular. You could even make 2 of these and still make your daily subway or bus ride if you were living in crowded urban centers. Plus, there was just so much room for variety with a dish like this that a lot of people didn't see the point in changing it up. However, that coffee work culture thing I was talking about is unfortunately a real phenomenon. Somewhere along the line, people really started to abandon the idea of having a solid meal at all for lunch, and I think you only see older workers who were raised in the 20th century still having things like this. Dandelion salad might sound like a fairy tale-like name for an incredibly frugal but delicious meal. By now, you might have noticed the scavenger vibe in terms of ingredients of the dishes so far. People making anything out of whatever they had on hand. Economic downturns often feature lifestyle changes, and the Great Depression was no other, sending people on a scramble to find and eat anything. Dandelion salad took scramble seriously as the meal involved finding and foraging dandelions. You would cut out all the roots, flowers, and waste to make the dressing for a very healthy salad. For people, especially those on a diet and a budget, this was a godsend. For a garnish, all people would usually put on it was lemon juice and olive oil, a dash of salt, and you were good to go at basically no cost. Brown betties were one of the most classic American desserts to ever grace the table of an American kid. Something that might be seen as an old-fashioned dessert now, but used to be the next best thing after an apple pie. The flavors of a brown betty usually come from the spiced apples and other fruit-layered dishes, which are really buttery. The sugary breadcrumbs on top give it a crunch, which really adds to the entire vibe of the brown betty. You're looking for a warm, comforting dish that gets you in a nostalgic mood. Something you can sit down with and enjoy bite for bite, not rush through. It's an experience that you want to savor, like an empty, windy street as you walk down by and enjoy it. The brown betty was definitely something that would get you up out into the street, whether you were going to visit your grandma's for an authentic pie or a nearby bakery to reminisce about childhood days. The earliest recipes you can find are the ones from 1866, but those are more like apple betties than the ones we're talking about. Either way, this dish has definitely evolved alongside the population, and those who grew up with it will remember it fondly. Prune pudding was one of the more niche dishes that were created during the Great Depression. What really was surprising was that prune pudding extended to the upper royalty as well, since even prominent VIPs would also be real low budget with how they eat. Prune pudding became very popular as a result of the efforts made by First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who would serve prune pudding at White House functions. It stained the White House's culinary track record, sure, but earned massive points with the struggling American people. For being made of such a simple ingredient and some syrups of your choice, it was definitely one of the tastiest and cheapest meals to come home to. Egg drop soup for some royal courts was a show of a chef's skill. In 1930, America, the soup became a beloved soup of the masses who were struggling to make an honest paycheck. Bread from last night and eggs beaten so thoroughly that the preparation itself doubled as a forearm workout resulted in an incredibly rich soup. Sometimes, if a home cook felt particularly fancy, they would have chicken either boiled or shredded in the mix. Using the chicken stock was also a common way to not let anything go to waste, since getting the most bang for your buck out of poultry became a habit of everyone. Most would just have this with eggs and throw in some ginger, chives and olives, or anchovies. We would definitely like to see this make a comeback with a less cost-oriented version that really explores the dish. We're going to go forward in time a bit, all the way to the beginning of what most people consider the late 20th century, where stuffed zucchini boats first started becoming something you would hear about regularly. At bars, from your friends and colleagues, or your partners. They became really hot in the 60s and 70s when it felt like everyday people were trying another dish from a new country that hadn't really touched base in America yet. It was the first time people expanded their taste buds beyond the bacon, pancake, and hash brown breakfasts they were mostly used to. Plus, stuffed zucchini boats were really healthy. They were a lot better to eat than those aforementioned breakfasts. The best part was that you could really change up the fillings, so depending on what you wanted, you could have fully vegetarian zucchini boats or ones with ground beef stuffings. People say this is a part of Italian-American cooking, but a lot of Mediterranean cooking makes use of dishes similar to zucchini boats, like using stuffed peppers and vegetables like eggplants. This sandwich would go great with some fresh fruit fluff salad, which was perfect for all kinds of occasions. Casual brunches, bridal showers, birthdays, and holiday gatherings all felt a little incomplete in the northern areas of America without this fruit fluff salad. It was a pretty good summer dish, and it had an assortment of fruits that worked well and bounced off of each other's textures and tastes. Stuff like a creamy lemon base supplemented with fresh strawberries or blueberries was a typical standard for a fresh fruit fluff salad, but you could also get tropical with kiwis and pineapples. A lot of things worked, and the reason it goes great with a croque madame is because ham was usually used as a topping for this dish too, so it was a great pairing. Rice salad with curry dressing is probably the epitome of the whole health consciousness movement that dominated so much of the second half of the 90s. Rice salad with curry dressing would also often be made with much healthier ingredients than what people were used to, such as brown rice, quinoa, and more. Bell peppers, cucumbers, and spinach were also popular ingredients to throw in there. To be honest, it's a bit like a chicken katsu curry rice bowl, but without the katsu curry or the fried chicken fillets. This was something we took inspiration from a lot of different cultures from. One of the most popular ones was the Mediterranean version, which really emphasized the use of olives. But people also tried spicier Spanish recipes or more tame and flavorful Italian ones. There were all kinds of ways to have your rice salad, but it was dishes like these that set the stage for curries to become a main, trendy food in America. Once something starts being a work lunch, you know it's made it to the big leagues. It summarizes a lot of what was going on in the 90s too. A push for more healthier food, a strong desire for transportable, easier-to-make recipes, and a fusion of different cultures, recipes, and ideas to basically create uncharted territory. Its golden days from the 20th century aren't something we have anymore, but it's still a knockout option to go for if you're trying to switch your lunch up a little. Back in the day, when you were out of just about everything except sugar, flour, and fruit, a vinegar cobbler was your only option. No surprise that it was also known as one of the famous desperation pies. Desperation pies are pies in American cuisine made using staple ingredients like butter, sugar, eggs, flour, and any other ingredients that cooks had on hand to complement them or substitute for ingredients that were out of season or too expensive. These pies were more common before refrigeration and canned pie fillings, and during times of hardship like the Great Depression and rationing of World War II. When fresh fruits were hard to come by, people turned to vinegar to mimic the tartness of fruits like apples and lemons. This cobbler used a mixture of vinegar, sugar, and spices to create a filling that, when baked, tasted surprisingly similar to a fruit cobbler. Instead of chunks of fresh apples, those on a budget would use apple cider vinegar to fake the acidic taste. The crust was made from basic pantry staples like flour, sugar, and butter or lard. The dish reportedly tasted like a custard made from salt and vinegar chips, a rare dessert that leaves the roof of your mouth tingling. Green tomato pie is something that'll have you running back for seconds. First off, you gotta hand it to whoever made this dish for their ingenuity. It's not every day you get a banger of a dish that actually is centered around making the green tomato shine out of everything else. But Southern home cooking will do that for you. Charlotte's green tomato pie in particular makes use of some typical Southern spices like cinnamon and nutmeg and unripened green tomatoes, and has you making a pie that'll rival even the best apple ones you could find at bakeries. Green tomatoes have an especially great harvest during the fall, so that's when this dish would see the most mileage. You would find houses all over the South constantly making green tomato pies. And this specific pie is an example of how you don't need anything fancy to create something that can get everyone at the table. You know what's even funnier? This dish is one of the best things to come out of mock cooking because it was made to imitate mock apple pie and mincemeat pies. An imitation of an imitation ends up giving us something that was a big part of Southern culture. Who would have thought? Ravioli sandwiches are an unconventional, playful lunch option that taps into the beloved flavors of Italian cuisine while embracing the convenience of a sandwich. These emerged likely in response to the popularity of canned ravioli introduced by Chef Boyardee in the 1930s. The sandwich involves placing canned ravioli, filled with meat or cheese, between slices of bread, which can be toasted or grilled to meld the flavors and add a textural contrast to the soft ravioli filling. Known in some places as Italian sloppy joes or ravioli hero, these sandwiches gained a following among budget-conscious college students and anyone appreciating the melding of comforting Italian flavors with the easy handheld format of a sandwich. The next thing we have on the list is salmon croquettes with creamed spinach. Now, on paper, this sounds like just what you would need, right? It's salmon, so there's protein. It's creamed spinach, so you definitely have a side that's jam-packed with nutrition. I mean, it seems ideal. The kind of thing you'd always want to be eating at work. For a long time in the 80s, that was how it worked too. People, particularly those working office and desk jobs, were very fond of this kind of lunch. It was also the perfect change in flavors from what people were originally used to. However, this was probably even more reliant on advanced preparation than egg salad stuffed tomatoes. That just wouldn't work with the way so many people were re-entering the workforce in the second half of the 20th century. It basically meant that your wife would have to stay at home and do kitchen duties every day, and most wives were opting to go to work instead. Labor-intensive meals like this, as a result, just didn't last in the long haul. Potato pancakes are one that we are very sad to have seen fade away from the arsenal of home chefs. Pancakes made with matzo or applesauce topped with garlic or fried onions made for such a mouth-watering meal. Low-income households back in those times were struggling to buy produce. Farmers' markets were uniformly unaffordable for middle-income households due to creeping inflation. People needed a vegetable that was cost-appropriate and easy to make in batches. Enter the potato pancake, which revolutionized the breakfast scene in a struggling time. As times improved, people slowly started going to more fancier and creative breakfasts, unfortunately leaving simpler dishes behind. Potato pancakes took a backseat in the face of changing food and economic trends, but anyone from the era will rave to you about the godsend these were. If you've ever walked the streets of downtown New York, I'm sure you're familiar with the infamous pastrami on rye. If your grandma's from the Big Apple, chances are her recipe is highly regarded. This sandwich became a staple in Jewish delis in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, thanks to Eastern European immigrants. This one just featured an old-fashioned slice of pastrami on rye bread and a dollop of mustard. Grandma knew that when it came to sandwiches, sometimes less is more, and pastrami on rye is the perfect example of that. But hey, don't forget no pastrami on rye is complete without a pickle on the side. The tartness of a dill pickle or the sweetness of a bread and butter pickle is the perfect contrast to the savory pastrami. Foraged mushrooms didn't always lining our burgers and topping our pizzas. For a majority of its history, it was really just something people ate when things were super bad. There was nothing to eat and people basically just had to forage for whatever they could. The most popular of this was the button mushroom, but they definitely tried to forage as much as they could. Now, despite this, mushrooms were still considered really low class. People had just begun to associate it with nothing but poverty and hard times. It wasn't until the middle and the later end of the 20th century that mushrooms started to become a classic topping you'd see on not just burgers and pizzas, but steaks, chicken dishes, sandwiches, and all kinds of soups and stews. Basically, it's a mushroom world, and we're just living in it now. A big part of this is how canned mushrooms became so accessible. Another reason is that an interest in European cuisine led to a massive boom in cream of soups and cream of mushroom soups. Share some of your favorite mushrooms with us right now in the comments. All right, let's talk about a real comfort food of the Depression: bean in tomato stew. Beans were a go-to ingredient during the Depression days because of how nutritious, affordable, and versatile they are. It's basically just what it sounds like: beans cooked in a tomato-based broth. But you could also throw in potatoes, carrots, and maybe even a little bit of rice for extra substance. The beans provided a good source of protein and fiber, while the tomato sauce added a burst of flavor. This stew could be enjoyed on its own or served over rice, bread, or even mashed potatoes if you were lucky enough to have them. Originally, Native Americans sweetened baked beans with maple syrup, but then someone decided to turn this protein into a stew, and hey, we're not complaining. It was a filling meal back in the day, and it's still cooked in many households around America where the budget is a bit too tight. I know this dish might sound plain, but believe me, when your belly is rumbling and your pantry is bare, this stew can be a lifesaver. Liverwurst and onion sandwiches were a really straightforward dish. There wasn't a lot going on here, and it was really just a 3-ingredient dish. Finally, we're going to back sandwiches we can actually recognize and digest. Who has their stuff cold? Not me. Liverwurst and onion sandwiches luckily aren't exactly things you serve cold either. This is a dish best served piping hot. See, liverwurst in itself is just a sausage that's been made with liver and some other parts of meat. Then you take in some raw onions and sauté them, serve them between slices of toasted bread with cheese, and there you go. Liverwurst is something we got from European and German communities, and it was really popular in areas like Detroit and Pennsylvania, where there were strong populations of European communities. Liverwurst was typically always blended with warm spices like allspice and nutmeg too, so you could either make it into this flavorful pâté or slice it and layer it with other kinds of things as well as cheese, of course. It's something that just faded out of relevance, though. It wasn't bad or impractical, but I guess it was a little too simple. Comment down below which 1950s lunch you'd dare to bite into first, then smash like and subscribe so we can keep serving up more retro foodie fun.